Something interesting is happening in the WNBA right now, and it's not just about stats, wins, or highlights. It's about perception, ranking, and how two of the league's most talked about young stars are being evaluated. Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese have been at the center of basketball conversations for months, but now a new ranking has added another layer. A top 50 list where 12 spots separate them. And that gap is raising questions. Not outrage. Not controversy. But questions worth exploring. Because when two players are so closely followed, so heavily discussed, and so impactful in different ways, what does a 12-spot difference really mean? Let's break it down. Over the past year, Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese have become two of the most recognizable names in women's basketball. Their rivalry dates back to college, where their matchups, especially during the NCAA tournament, captured national attention. Since entering the WNBA, that attention hasn't faded. If anything, it has grown. Clark, now with the Indiana Fever, came into the league with enormous expectations. She was widely known for her deep shooting range, playmaking ability, and offensive creativity. Meanwhile, Angel Reese, playing for the Atlanta Dream, has built her identity on physicality, rebounding dominance, and defensive intensity. Two very different styles. Two very different roles. But both highly impactful. So when a top 50 list ranks players across the league and places 12 spots between them, it naturally becomes a point of discussion, not because one is better, in a definitive sense, but because rankings often reflect how value is being interpreted. And that's where things get interesting. According to recent discussions surrounding the list, Caitlin Clark is positioned higher than Angel Reese. The exact placements matter less than the gap itself. A 12-spot difference suggests a noticeable separation in perceived value, but is that gap truly reflective of their impact? To answer that, we need to look beyond rankings and into context. Caitlin Clark's game is built around offensive creation. She's not just scoring, she's generating opportunities. Reports suggest that her presence on the floor changes defensive schemes. Teams often adjust their coverage to limit her shooting range, which in turn opens space for teammates. That kind of gravity is difficult to quantify, but it's a major factor in how players are evaluated. On the other side, Angel Reese brings a different kind of impact. She thrives in areas that don't always dominate highlight reels, but are critical to winning: rebounding, second chance points, interior defense. According to recent discussions, Reese consistently ranks among top performers in rebounding metrics, and her ability to control the glass can shift the momentum of games. So right away, we're comparing two different forms of value. One is more visible. One is more physical. One stretches the floor. One controls the paint. And depending on how you prioritize those contributions, your ranking might look very different. That's why lists like this often spark debate, not because they're right or wrong, but because they reveal how people define greatness. If you prioritize scoring versatility and playmaking, Caitlin Clark naturally rises. Her skill set aligns with modern offensive systems, where spacing and shot creation are highly valued. She can shoot from deep, facilitate offense, and operate under pressure. But if you prioritize consistency, physical dominance, and control of possession, Angel Reese becomes incredibly valuable. Rebounding, for example, directly influences how many chances a team gets. It limits opponents while creating opportunities. And Reese excels in that area. So the question becomes, how do you weigh those contributions against each other? That's where opinions start to diverge. Fans are reacting in different ways, and that's not surprising. Some believe the ranking reflects Clark's immediate offensive impact and her ability to elevate a team's scoring potential. Others argue that Reese's consistency and physical presence are being undervalued. According to recent discussions, Some fans feel that rankings often favor players with more visible stats, points, assists, shooting highlights, while overlooking contributions that don't always appear in box scores. Others counter that offensive creation is one of the hardest skills in basketball, and players who can do it at a high level deserve recognition. Neither perspective is entirely wrong. And that's what makes this conversation so compelling. Because it's not just about two players, it's about how we evaluate basketball itself. Another layer to consider is team context. Caitlin Clark's role with the Indiana Fever involves significant responsibility. She's often tasked with leading the offense, handling the ball, and making key decisions under pressure. That kind of role naturally leads to higher visibility, and sometimes higher scrutiny. Angel Reese, with the Atlanta Dream, contributes in a system that may emphasize balance and physical play. Her role might not always require her to be the primary scorer, but her impact is felt through effort, positioning, and consistency. So when comparing rankings, it's important to recognize that not all roles are equal in visibility, even if they are equal in importance. And that distinction can influence perception. Another factor is adaptation. Transitioning from college to the WNBA is not easy. The pace is faster, the players are stronger, and the margin for error is smaller. Both Clark and Reese are navigating that transition in their own ways. Clark's adjustment has involved learning how to handle defensive pressure at a higher level. According to reports, teams often target her with aggressive coverage, forcing quick decisions. Her ability to adapt to that pressure is part of her ongoing development. Reese's transition, meanwhile, has focused on maintaining her physical dominance against stronger competition. Rebounding at the professional level requires positioning, timing, and strength, and she has continued to show consistency in that area. So when we look at rankings, we're not just evaluating current performance, we're also considering growth potential. And that adds another dimension to the discussion. Some analysts believe Clark's offensive ceiling gives her an edge in rankings. Others believe Reese's consistency provides a stable foundation that teams can rely on. Again, it comes down to perspective. Let's also talk about narrative. In sports, narratives play a powerful role in shaping perception. Caitlin Clark entered the league with a reputation as a generational shooter. Angel Reese entered with a reputation as a dominant rebounder and competitor. Those narratives don't define them, but they do influence how their performances are interpreted. When Clark hits a deep three, it reinforces expectations. When Reese secures a double-digit rebound game, it does the same. But what happens when they step outside those narratives? That's where deeper analysis becomes important. Because true evaluation requires looking beyond expectations and into actual impact. And that's something fans are increasingly doing. According to recent discussions, there's growing interest in advanced metrics, efficiency ratings, and impact statistics. Fans are not just watching games, they're analyzing them. They're asking questions like, how does a player affect team performance when they're on the floor? What happens to spacing, pace, and defensive structure? How consistent is their contribution across different matchups? These are complex questions, and they don't always have simple answers. But they matter when it comes to rankings. So when we return to the 12-spot gap between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, it's worth asking, is that gap based on performance, role, narrative, or a combination of all three? The answer is likely a mix. And that's why it's important not to view rankings as absolute truth, but as a snapshot of perspective at a given moment. Because the WNBA season is dynamic. Players evolve. Teams adjust. Roles change. And rankings shift. Another interesting angle is how this comparison reflects the broader direction of the league. The WNBA is growing, not just in popularity, but in style. There's an increasing emphasis on pace, spacing, and offensive versatility. At the same time, physical play, rebounding, and defense remain essential. Clark and Reese represent those two dimensions. One stretches the game outward, the other anchors it inward. And both are necessary. So instead of asking which player is better, maybe the more meaningful question is, which style is more valued right now? Because that answer can influence rankings. And it can also change over time. Fan reactions continue to highlight this divide. Some fans see Clark as a transformative offensive player, someone who can redefine how teams approach scoring. Others see Reese as a foundational piece, someone who brings stability, effort, and control. According to recent discussions, there's also appreciation for how both players have handled the spotlight. Entering the league with high expectations is never easy, but both have maintained focus on their development. That's something that often gets overlooked. Because while rankings generate headlines, growth happens quietly, in practices, in adjustments, in small improvements that don't always make news. And both Clark and Reese are in that process. So what does this 12-spot difference really tell us? It tells us that evaluation is complex. It tells us that value is subjective. And it tells us that conversations like this are part of what makes sports engaging. Because fans care. They analyze. They debate. They compare. Not to diminish players, but to understand them better. And that's ultimately a positive thing. As the season continues, this gap may shrink. It may grow. Or it may become irrelevant as new players emerge and new performances shift the conversation. But for now, it serves as a reminder. Rankings are not conclusions. They are conversations. And in this case, the conversation is just getting started. So here's the question to leave you with. When you evaluate a player, what matters most to you? Visible impact like scoring and playmaking, or foundational impact like rebounding and defense? Because your answer might say more about the ranking than the ranking says about the players.